Welcome to A Push Towards Success. In today's video, we'll be reviewing Unit 1 of AP Comparative Government and Politics, starting right now. So as the name suggests, people studying comparative government and politics have to compare different government structures that exist around the world. This study requires knowledge of culture, history, economics, and other areas as well. In order to conduct a comparative study, we need access to data. But even before that, we need to understand a few things about information. Political scientists utilize empirical evidence. This is evidence based on measurable data, either from observation or experimentation. Normative evidence, which is based on opinions, can be valuable as it provides us an interpretation of provided data. However, because normative evidence includes value judgments, we want to stick with quantitative and qualitative data. Quantitative data is numerical information that can be gathered by certain formulas and trials, while qualitative data is non-numerical information that is gathered by interviews, observations, and questionnaires. With all that said, here are some different datasets that can give us valuable information on our 6 AP countries. If you plan to use any of these datasets, you need to understand what each number means. For example, HDI is measured between the numbers 0 to 1. The higher the number, the better the quality of living, education, and health. The Fragile State Index uses numbers 0 to 120 to measure the fragility of a state. The higher the number, the greater the fragility. Understanding what number means can give us a better look into some of these countries. For example, just by looking at GDP, we can understand that China's economy is the second largest economy in the world. However, when looking at GDP per capita, we can see where China is compared to other countries. By looking at these two numbers, we can make an educated guess that perhaps China is struggling with wealth inequality or has an extremely large population, both which happens to be true. Keep in mind, though, that correlation does not mean causation. It's important to understand that causation is difficult to determine at times because there are a multitude of variables such as cultural and societal expectations, leadership, and foreign relations. Now that data is out of the way, we can proceed to talk about countries. In comparative government, we are comparing states, which are made of land, population, government, and legitimacy. A nation is a community of people that share commonalities such as history and language. If a state is homogeneous, we call these states a nation-state. Nigeria, a state with multiple ethnic groups, is not a nation-state. While it's fun to compare different cultures and societal norms, we're most interested in comparing different forms of regimes. In political science, a government is a body that governs or rules a state, while a regime is the method of such ruling. A simplified view of regimes would place democracies and authoritarian governments on the same spectrum. Depending on what the government allows or restricts, we as political scientists can identify whether a state is a democracy or an authoritarian state. For example, if a country has a proper constitution that things play out accordingly to law, that country runs on a rule of law. However, if a country makes decisions based on a ruler's sleep schedule, the country upholds rule by law. Just because a country is an authoritarian government does not mean that it will remain an authoritarian government forever. When some of the characteristics of a democracy or authoritarian government are changed, we may see a shift towards the other end of the spectrum. In AP Comparative Government, we are interested in the process of democratization. This can include gradual changes to how citizens participate in politics. For example, the ruling government can make laws to allow elections that are competitive, fair, and transparent. They can also increase transparency so that citizens can make better choices based on provided information. I'll share 2 examples of regime shifts. Mexico, which has been a one-party state since 1929, experienced mass protests against the results of the 1988 election. The issues of fraud pushed the government to make internal reforms. In 1990, the Mexican government passed the Federal Code of Electoral Institutions and Procedures and established the Federal Election Institute, which is an independent body that oversees elections. In 1996, the Mexican government passed the 1996 electoral reform, which completely cut off the IFE from government control. All these shifts resulted in the PRI's defeat in 2000 to Vicente Fox. The opposite can happen as well. In Russia, presidents have the right to serve 2 consecutive terms of 4 years. Putin, who served his 2 terms from 2000 to 2008, became prime minister in 2008, thus defeating the purpose of this restriction. In addition, the Russian government made constitutional revisions in 2008 to extend the 4-year term to 6 years. This allowed Putin to rule from 2012 to 2018 and 2018 to 2024. In 2020, the Russian government held a constitutional referendum which resulted in granting Putin another 2 terms, thus allowing him to hypothetically run until 2036. Just like an authoritarian government has the ability to transform into a true democracy, a democracy can also turn into an authoritarian government. That's why it's important to understand the sources of power and authority in our 6 different AP countries. By power, we are talking about the ability to make someone do something. By authority, we are talking about the right to make someone do something. From this chart on the screen, you should be able to understand the different sources and changes of power and authority in our 6 different AP countries. The source explains how governments in each country received this power. The change explains how governments took over the old system and made their system of rule. Sometimes these changes can occur peacefully, like in the United Kingdom. However, as you see on the screen, violence is necessary as well. Once we understand how the ruling government got their power, we need to understand how the power is shared within the country. Power can be shared between the central government and the regional government. If you don't know to what extent power is shared, ask yourself the following questions. In our right, as you see on the left side of the screen, all you have to do is attach technical terms. Federalism is when power is shared between the central and regional government. The central government will still have power over foreign relations and the military, but regional governments should have power over topics such as healthcare, education, driving laws, and so on. Unitary states are the opposite of federal states because power is concentrated with the central government. There's one more way power can be shared, and that is devolution. Devolution is when a unitary state shares power to regional governments. While this may sound like federalism, there's one significant difference between federalism and devolution. In federal states, power division is protected and guaranteed by the Constitution. In unitary states, power is shared from the central government to regional governments. Because power is voluntarily shared, power can be taken away as well. Up to this point, I've been talking about governments and how power is divided within a state. What's more important is to understand how the power and authority is accepted by the people, and that is called legitimacy. One of the obvious sources of legitimacy is popular election. Other sources can include constitutional provisions, nationalism, tradition, economic growth, ideology, religious heritage, and endorsement. Here is a quick summary of the sources of and challenges towards legitimacy in our 6 AP countries. Legitimacy, just like anything else, can be strengthened or weakened. For example, if a country responds positively towards a protest, the government's legitimacy, in theory, should increase. On the other hand, if a country clamps down on a protest, the government's legitimacy, in theory, should decrease. As outsiders, we need to look at what's going on within a country in order to assess legitimacy. This leads us to our final topic for Unit 1, stability. Before talking about stability, I need to briefly review the definition of sovereignty. Sovereignty is having an independent legal authority over a state, which is over territory and population. Going back to stability, political stability is extremely crucial for any state because a stable government can sustain a consistent provision of services. This should increase confidence towards the state and thus sustain sovereignty. Let's use Jenga as an example. If Jenga is a state, there are 2 things that threaten the stability of Jenga: your friends or yourself. In the same way, there are 2 actors that threaten the stability of a state: internal actors such as protesters and separatist groups, and external actors such as international terrorists or other countries. Governments want to effectively deal with international and external actors in order to maintain stability. This can be Mexico's attempt to address drug-related issues or Nigeria dealing with separatist groups and terrorists. Other countries, especially authoritarian, may respond with media restrictions to confront actors that challenge the government. To summarize, Unit 1 is all about the tools and the foundations of comparative government. Without good data, one cannot make a legitimate and comprehensive argument regarding power, authority, legitimacy, and stability. The AP test can test students whether unitary or federal states are better. The AP test can also ask students to compare and contrast the sources of legitimacy or the effectiveness of authoritarian regimes and democracies in terms of maintaining stability. Either way, it will be important for you to recall quantitative and qualitative data and use it to make your push towards success.